Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Cavan-Smith. Tonight, the art of the deal. Japan encourages African leaders to look towards its model of investment. There have been warnings in the past that the continent should tread more carefully with the big money that China has been investing and the unsustainable debt that might give rise to. Also, over 500,000 people living with HIV/AIDS in Cameroon may not be able to get treatment after next January. The government had pledged to pay up to 20% of the cost of antiretroviral drugs, but that subsidy is now in jeopardy after Yaoundé fell behind in payments. And South Africa's varied wildlife has created the foundations for a booming taxidermy industry, a lucrative business worth 35 million euros a year. Practitioners, though, have continued to come under fire from animal rights groups. But first, dozens of African leaders headed to Tokyo this week for the Tokyo International Conference on African Development. On Thursday, Japan stressed what it has got to offer over China when it comes to supporting projects in Africa. President Shinzo Abe cautioned the continent against getting too deeply into debt and highlighted that Japan's development projects often come with fewer strings attached. China's huge investment in African infrastructure has sparked warnings that the debt is untenable. Japan said that it is going to try and train experts in dozens of African nations on risk management and public debt as it takes a more people-focused approach.
Launching impactful Japanese action in Africa. Shinzo Abe is counting on Tokyo's private sector to boost his country's presence across the continent.
From companies founded more than a century ago to startups, investors vary by a great degree, and yet they all seek value in Africa.
The ambitious plan aims to increase private investment in African countries and offer €3 billion worth of loans for infrastructure projects. An initiative approved by African nations, including Benin, which hopes to attract Japanese companies.
Benin is stable and secure. We're willing to do business and are making a decision quickly. There are numerous opportunities.
Japan hopes it can compete with China, which has a firm hold in many African countries. In 2017, Chinese investment totaled nearly €39 billion, almost 6 times more than Japan's $7 billion. But Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative in Africa has been criticised for favouring Chinese companies and workers over locals, saddling companies with debt and ignoring rights and environmental issues. Japan is hoping to distinguish itself on such matters by working with the African Development Bank to promote quality infrastructure projects and transparency.
Look now at some news in brief. Nigeria is planning on cracking down on smuggling by partially closing its border with Benin. Prices of staples, particularly rice, have shot up since the government restricted importers' access to foreign exchange currency. Now, those price increases have in turn given black market operators more incentive to smuggle in more stock from neighbouring countries. Ethiopia is a step closer to creating a 10th autonomous region. On Thursday, it agreed to a referendum in November on self-determination for the Sidama community. Clashes broke out in the region in July when security forces faced off against certain branches of pro-autonomy activists from the Sidama. At least 8 other ethnic groups at the moment in the country have also been seeking autonomy since President Abiy Ahmed took office last year. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, Rival interests have sometimes, though, inflamed tensions between communities. And Sierra Leoneans living next to the country's largest diamond mine have lodged a complaint against their government for failing to look after their homes and their environment. Residents of Koidu filed the suit on Thursday. They allege that authorities haven't done anything about the water contamination and destruction of their homes by mine operator Octia Limited. The complaint follows a lawsuit filed by the residents in Sierra Leone's High Court back in March, seeking $288 million in damages from Octia. Now, over 500,000 people living with HIV/AIDS in Cameroon may not be able to get treatment after next January. The government had pledged to pay up to 20% of the cost of antiretroviral drugs, but that subsidy is now in jeopardy after Yaoundé fell behind in payments to the Global Fund NGO, which fights the spread of certain epidemics. Our correspondents tell us more.
It has been her daily routine for the past 16 years. At 10 p.m. every night, Anne takes her medication, an antiretroviral drug which reduces the amount of HIV virus in her system. For now, the treatment is free, but patients may have to pay for them from next January.
At the moment, I don't spend anything for my antiretroviral drugs. Nothing at all. I only need to pay my transport fare to pick them up. My biggest fear is that the state may stop the grant fund. We may be at risk. We would die.
Without the subsidy, tens of thousands of HIV-positive people will go without treatment. Cameroon owes more than 43 million euros to the Global Fund, which is the world's largest sponsor for AIDS, TB and malaria prevention, treatment and care programs. In this letter, the fund has threatened to limit the resources given to Cameroon until 2020. Dr. Com, who runs the Center for HIV and AIDS Patients, is worried.
Here are some of our antiretrovirals.
Faced with threats in the disruption of supplies, she watches her ever-shrinking stocks closely.
For the past 3 months, our stocks of drugs is going down. Before we could supply patients with antiretrovirals to last 3 months. But since May, June, we can no longer do that. We believe the consequences of the grants not being given is already being felt.
Health experts like Dr. Zay Albert have also expressed fears over an imminent health disaster if Cameroon fails to pay its outstanding contributions to the Global Fund.
If the fund withdraws its support today, the state will be affected and our health system will not be able to handle the inevitable crisis we will face.
So far, the Ministry of Public Health has not responded to our request for an interview. Each year, the Global Fund Partnership mobilizes and invests over 4 billion to support its experts in over 100 countries.
Well, South Africa's varied wildlife has created the foundations for a booming taxidermy industry. The lucrative business is worth 35 million euros a year in the country. Practitioners have also come under fire from animal rights groups. Nicolas Chemin has more.
Taxidermy began in 2200 BC in ancient Egypt. These animals have been prepared by the company owned by South African Rodney Kretzschmar. The family business was founded by his grandfather.
All of these details, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the teeth, this whole section here, that's all hand done. In other words, it's a soft clay underneath here, and this is put into the animal's face. And once it's dried, it will remain in place. And then we do the cosmetics afterwards, the actual cleaning.
Kretzschmar has 30 employees who work on up to 2,500 animals a year.
During that time, we were not seeing the animals. So what makes me very interested is that I get to know more animals that I've never seen before in my life.
Animal rights groups criticize taxidermy as businesses depend on big game hunting. Kretzschmar argues that the hunters he uses are a key part of local animal conservation. Taxidermy in South Africa is an industry that is worth 35 million euros a year. One lion, for example, costs 4,000 euros. And for an elephant, you would have to spend up to 45,000 euros.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.